Now, let's move on to compositing. Before we jump in, it's worth taking a moment to understand what compositing actually is and why we're using it here. Compositing happens after the render is complete. At this point, the materials have already done their job. Now we're working directly with the final image. You can think of it like photo editing for a 3D render. This is where we adjust contrast, manage highlights, and add subtle effects that make the image feel more photographic. In our case, we'll use compositing to enhance the highlights on the glaze. Glossy surfaces interact strongly with light, and in real cameras, those highlights rarely stay perfectly sharp. They usually bloom slightly. They spread softly across the surface. That subtle glow is what we're trying to recreate. For contrast, we've already benefited from Blender's built-in color management. It does a great job handling dynamic range automatically, so we won't be doing any heavy color grading here. Blender has already given us a strong foundation. To get started, switch to the Compositing workspace. Enable Use Nodes. Then enable Backdrop, so the rendered image appears behind the node editor. At first, nothing will appear, and that's completely expected. We haven't rendered an image yet. Compositing only works after a render exists. Remember, compositing is post-processing. It operates on the rendered image, not the scene itself. So now go to Render, Render Image. Once the render completes, return to the Compositing workspace. You should now see render layers connected directly to Composite. If the image still doesn't appear in the backdrop, simply toggle backdrop off once and then enable it again. Now the image should display correctly. This is our starting point. And there's one important thing to remember here. The composite node is what actually gets saved to disk. It represents the final image output. The viewer node, on the other hand, is only for preview. It allows you to inspect the image inside the node editor, nothing more. So if nothing is connected to the composite node, none of your compositing effects will appear in the final render. Everything might look correct in the node editor, but when you export the image, those effects will be missing. So always make sure your final node chain flows into composite. All right, press Shift-A. Go to Filter and add a glare node. Place the glare node right after render layers. Change the glare type to Fog Glow. Fog Glow is one of the most natural options for food and product renders. It mimics how real camera lenses soften and spread intense highlights instead of creating sharp star shapes or streaks. Now, let's dial in the settings carefully. Set threshold to around 0.85. This is important. It ensures that only the brightest parts of the image, mainly the glaze reflections, produce the glow. Everything else stays untouched. Set smooth to 0.15. This helps the glow fade naturally into the surrounding pixels instead of stopping abruptly. Set strength to 0.06. Keep this value small. If the strength becomes too high, the glow spreads too far, and we lose that tight, glossy highlight. Set saturation to 0.75. This keeps the warm tone of the glaze intact without pushing the colors too far. Set glare size to 6. This creates a soft, photographic bloom that works beautifully with glossy materials under strong directional light, exactly like our current donut scene. Finally, set quality to high. For final output, always use high quality. It prevents artifacts and keeps the glow smooth and clean. Now, take a look at the image. The effect should feel subtle, but meaningful. This one is before, and this is after. The highlights spread slightly, the glaze remains shiny and appealing, and the render starts to take on that final, polished look, almost like it was captured by a real camera in a controlled studio. Now, let's preview this effect live. Change the bottom window to a 3D viewport. Switch the viewport shading to rendered mode. Then open the small drop-down next to the shading icon. Under Compositor, choose Always. As soon as you enable that, the compositing effects appear live in the viewport. No more guessing, no back and forth test renders. You're now seeing the final composited image while you work. You can orbit around the scene, make small adjustments, and instantly see how the glow reacts. Watch how the highlights shift as the viewing angle changes. That behavior is very similar to how a real camera lens reacts when strong light hits glossy surfaces. Alright, that covers everything we need for compositing in this tutorial.